Hi everyone, welcome to another Creative Tech Friday. Today we're going to take a look at some tips around audio editing. Some of these tips will be fairly universal in that they can be applied to different kinds of audio software, and they'll just be principles for editing. But some of them will be slightly more application specific, and the application we're going to use today is ProTools, as that's what we have at the library, in our studios, and on some of our computers. There is a free version of ProTools called ProTools First, which you can get a hold of if you aren't able to afford it and would like to try this at home, and it has all of the power that we're about to look at, with certain limitations around session size and numbers of sessions and so on. So once we get into ProTools, we'll need to bring in some audio to work with. To do that, we would go to the File menu up the top left and say Import Audio, or we can also do what I'm going to do and simply drag audio in across from the file browser. So here we've got our audio in ProTools, and first of all you can just simply press play.
What do roofs do when they're smashed?
To play the audio, and play again to stop it. What we're going to notice with the initial behavior of the way that works in ProTools is it will go back to where you've initially played from, and that may or may not be what you want. So we're going to talk about that first. If I press play, I'll demonstrate this again. I press play.
What do roofs do when they're smashed?
And then I press stop.
I don't know.
It has gone back again to the beginning of the file.
What do roofs...
That's all to do with this little button here, which is extremely important, and is called Insertion Follows Playback. If we toggle that on, it will change the way this audio playback behaves, and when we press pause or stop with the spacebar again, it will stop where it left off, as it were.
What do roofs do when they're smashed?
Stops there, and if we play again,
I don't know. What do roofs do when they're smashed?
it will continue on. So that's a very important little button. Some people get very annoyed about it flicking back to the beginning all the time. I personally probably leave it like that most of the time, but you can have it either way and switch back and forth as required. So the next thing we're going to look at is getting a better view of this audio. Audio editing is often surprisingly visual. Even though you need to use your ear, you do need to be able to look closely and get in nice and close to the audio. So the first thing in Pro Tools, and different applications will be slightly different to this, but every audio application you use will almost certainly have a zoom in function in some way or another. In Pro Tools, there's a couple of ways we're going to look at it. The first, over here, this little button on the edge of the track will let us set how large the audio file looks vertically. So we're going to go to Fit to Window so that it's nice and big vertically. And then we want to make it a bit larger as well horizontally. There's a couple of ways to do that. The first way we're going to look at is using the Zoomer tool. So the tools across the top here are going to take up quite a lot of this video, and the first one to look at is Zoomer. If we click on that, we'll just click normal zoom, and what that will let us do is just click on the audio file and zoom in. If you want to zoom back out, you would hold the Alt or Option key on your keyboard and click, and you'll see that the little magnifying glass changes into a minus sign to show zoom out when you hold down that key. Okay, so we zoom it in so it's quite nice and large. And you can scroll around left or right down here, or if you have a trackpad or a mouse with horizontal scrolling, you can scroll left and right with your mouse as well. So on to editing. We're going to go through a couple of these tools. The first one we're going to look at is the trim tool. The trim tool is very quick and easy to use. Basically, if we point this at the edge of an audio file, it will let us trim that audio in. Now what you're going to notice is at the moment, when I do that, it's not letting me entirely select where I want the trim to be. It's snapping to certain lines or grid lines that are in the background of Pro Tools. And that brings us to this other point. We're going to have to and fro between these a little bit today. Edit modes in Pro Tools. So we're going to be looking at edit modes and tools and the way they interact with each other, and this is similar with other audio programs such as Logic Pro. You'll also have similar options. At the moment we're on grid mode. Now grid mode is extremely useful for working with musical compositions, as what it does is it snaps to a musical grid based on the tempo or beats per minute of your song, meaning if we wanted to edit this and just chop off the first couple of beats of a bar, we could do so. But when we're working with dialogue and things like this that don't adhere to a musical tempo or timing, it's going to be much more useful to use this slip mode. So we'll switch over to slip mode now, and what slip mode will let us do is slide that trim edit anywhere we want without having to be snapping or sticking to those grid lines in the background. So that's trim, the first tool. So that could have been at either end. We can also go to the end of the audio if we wanted to trim off this section, the punchline. We could do that if we want to. And now it would.
What do roofs do when they're smashed?
I don't know. What do roofs do when they're smashed?
So now we've lost that section at the end, so I'm actually going to undo that because we want to keep that undo trim clip from the edit menu up the top. And we're going to zoom back a little bit as well, so back to the zoomer tool, or you can also do that with keyboard commands using command for a Mac or control and square brackets to go zoom out or zoom in. So again, that's command and square brackets or control and square brackets if you're on a PC. So that's the trim tool. The next one we're going to look at is the hand tool. The hand tool is very basic. It just lets you move the entire audio file around. So if you have multiple, you might need to move them around. It will be very much controlled by the edit mode you're on. So if we were still in that grid mode and we're trying to move with the hand, it's not going to let us go in between those grid lines, which for a musical composition might be just exactly what you want, as you need that vocal to start right on the beat or right on the beginning of the bar. But when we're working with dialogue like this, we're going to need to keep it on slip. So that's the hand tool. The next one is select. So the selector tool is extremely powerful. The selector tool works a lot like using text selection in a word processor. So that would let us highlight a certain section of audio and listen to it first of all. If we just press play, you can listen to the selection that you've made. But you could also delete it. So if we go a bit further on here, by the way, you can also just use the selector tool to just click and play from any moment in your timeline. So if we go a bit further on, we've got this kind of gap where there's just these breath sounds and then the last little bit of audio. We might want to get rid of that. So we could highlight that and press delete on the keyboard and get rid of that. Doing it this way, we would then have to get the hand tool, and this is not perhaps the best way to do this, and we'll go back and show a better workflow for this in a second, but this is one way to do it, is to delete in slip mode and then use the hand to bring over that other piece of audio and close up the gap.
This is a joke with no punchline.
So let's go back and undo that, because I want to show you another edit mode now, which is extremely useful and again is not unique to Pro Tools. This is something that you can find in other programs with another name sometimes. Logic Pro certainly just uses the same name, which is Shuffle, but other programs have slightly different names for this. If we go to the Shuffle edit mode and we have our same selection and we press delete now, what it's going to do is automatically close that gap up for us and save us the hassle, and that can be of moving it with the hand, and that can be extremely useful when you're doing multiple little edits, just closing up the gaps.
When they're smashed. This is a joke with no punchline.
So yeah, that's a big time saver, and if you're using an audio program that doesn't have functionality like that, you might want to look at trying to use a different one that has something like that if you're going to do a lot of audio editing, because it will save you a huge amount of time. So that's the tools that we've looked at so far are the zoomer tool, the trim tool, which lets you trim from the edges, the selector tool, and the grabber tool or hand tool. The last one we're going to look at is really just a combination of three. So if we go up to the top of this toolbar, this toolbox, we can click this little line which is above these three, and it will select all three at once, and we're now using something called the Smart tool. So the Smart tool is basically a quicker way than having to go up here and select your tool each time out of these three. It will be contextual in that it will change to one of the tools that you need based on where you're pointing. For example, if we point to the edge of an audio clip, it will automatically change to the trim tool for you. If you point inside and at the top of an audio clip, it will become the selection tool. And if you point in the bottom and inside the audio file, you'll get the hand tool, and that will let you move the audio file around. So the Smart tool is a very quick way at moving between tools just based on where you're pointing inside the audio file. It can be quite confusing if you don't know that it's on and you don't know what it's doing. You might have gotten used to using one tool or another, and then you'll find you clicking in certain places and it's doing different things, and it can be confusing. But once you get the hang of it, it is definitely a much quicker way to work. The last type of edit we're going to look at is a split. So splits work with a combination of the selector tool and a keyboard shortcut. If you click somewhere in the audio and press Command E for a Mac or Control E for a PC, what that will do is put a little split in the audio, and you can then use the grabber tool or something like trim as well would work, and delete the one side of the split. I've just undone that to go back. That Command E for split or edit is another way to remember that. It's pretty universal across a lot of different programs, so you'll find if you get used to that in one program, it may well work in another one when you move into it. So that's Command E for split or edit. But let's go in a little bit more detail about how you would do a good split, and just in general, this is a principle for audio editing that we're going to explore. So if we select a little portion of audio and we zoom in really close, so that's using the command brackets right now to zoom in rather than the zoom tool. So when we zoom in really close to the audio, you can see the graph representing the audio amplitude going up and down in peaks and troughs, and there's a line through the center, and essentially that line through the middle running horizontal represents silence. Whenever the audio crosses over that line, that would be a moment of silence. And another way that we describe that in the audio world is a zero crossing. So the reason we're bringing that up is if you edit on that point, so if I press Command E there, that would be an extremely clean edit, meaning that you're not going to hear any kind of little pops or clips or undesirable sounds. If, on the other hand, you put your edit here where there is a peak or a trough in the audio, you're going to almost always, not always, but sometimes, experience a little bit of a click. So I've set up a little example later on in the audio. If we zoom back and we come over to here, there's an example of an edit that has created a click here. So if you couldn't hear that, just make sure you put some headphones on, maybe pause the video, grab some headphones and have another listen, but there is a definite click. I'll play it again.
This is a joke. This is a joke.
There's a couple of ways that we could rectify that. One of which would be just going in and adjusting that edit point at a very micro level when we're zoomed in nice and close, so that it doesn't sit on a peak or a trough in the audio and it sits on a zero crossing. That's not always possible. Sometimes you need to edit on a point that is going to create a click. So there's another way you can address that issue or that click issue, and that's using something called a fade. Now different programs have different ways of doing this, and ProTools, the way it works is we would select, using the selector tool over the end of the audio, so must be starting on the clip and going off the end, and we press Command F or Control F for a PC. And we'll get this little fade window that comes up. We're not going to go deep into fades right now, as there's quite a lot of options here. You can simply change how the audio fades in or out, like so. And actually, I should go back a step because that's too big a fade. What we needed to do first was zoom in. So we're going to zoom in, and so we're just fading off the edge of the clip like that. And now when we go back and listen, we should find we've removed or at least reduced the level of that click.
This is a joke.
Yeah, I don't hear a click there anymore. So that's doing a fade. I'll just undo that and show you one other way to do that, which is if we go back to the Smart tool, we can point in the top corner of an audio file and we'll get this little fade symbol, and we can just click to insert a fade. So that's it from us today for Creative Tech Friday. Please keep an eye out for future Creative Tech videos and more audio videos if that's your particular interest, and thanks for watching.